Hello, my name is Tia, also known as Costume Fiend, because I'm both evil and excessively fond of dressing up. In the last video I talked about some vampire movies that I liked, but as I was coming up with ideas, I realized there were a lot of different angles I could take when talking about these undead creatures. So I went through my tag about vampires in general, I guess, on Tumblr, and came across two posts about how in fiction Dracula has been given multiple children. It's kind of interesting to me how throughout pop culture history people have decided to essentially make OCs based on one of the older vampires in literature. It's easy to understand why though, because you've got some lore already established, and because vampires are pretty much immortal, you can set a Dracula story at pretty much any point in history. The children of Dracula, though, that I'm most familiar with are probably Dracula from Monster High, Mavis from Hotel Transylvania, Alucard from Castlevania, Isabella from Scooby-Doo, and Lily from The Munsters. I thought about ranking them, but with a few exceptions, I'm really terrible at picking favorites amongst the things that I like, so I'm just gonna do some rundowns. I'm gonna start with Alucard because I've only watched the first season of Castlevania and gotten secondhand information from my sister about the rest of the seasons. As far as I can remember, Alucard doesn't have any vampire abilities that are unique to him, but his mother was a human woman, which makes him only half vampire. I think she said he could turn into a wolf at least, and I think my sister wasn't sure if he could turn into a bat or not. But his early life was pretty isolated, which in hindsight, considering everything that goes down, is kind of sad. What stands out to me about him besides his famous father is his character design. He's definitely more of the pretty boy vampire Anne Rice type, although I like long hair, so I'm not complaining. So now that I've started talking about this topic, I realize most of Dracula's fictional children are ladies. I'm not sure why he comes off as a girl dad to writers and artists, but if that makes sense to them, that's fine with me. Actually, on that note, I feel like one of the posts I saw that mentioned Dracula might be the canonically oldest of the kids based on her lore, which is also kind of funny. I mean, Dracula exists in a franchise for children, and I would argue it's like the most kid-friendly version of a vampire and Dracula out of all of them. I'm going to assume her being vegetarian is definitely influenced by the fact that she's meant to be for kids. And when I say vegetarian, I just mean she doesn't drink blood. She eats fruits, vegetables, and iron supplements, apparently. That kind of actually reminds me of what I said about Jerry from Fright Night last week. She also exists in a post-Twilight world, which also put the idea of vegetarian vampires out into the world. I'm not saying Twilight did it first, but it was definitely one of the ones that I can remember first. Despite this softening, which I know certain Dracula and vampire fanboys hate, I do like Dracula's design and love that the newest iteration of her character is more chubby, and I think also that one of the shorter ones of the other girls. It's a nice contrast that she's short because Dracula and his progeny are usually depicted as tall and slender. And Dracula is also apparently the reason that Valentine's Day exists as a holiday. I don't think any of the others can boast that. This has nothing to do with her abilities, though. That's just a fun fact. Because Monster High came out when I wasn't really playing with dolls anymore, I didn't get one originally. But in recent years, I decided to buy one, and she currently chills out with her friend Claudine, who's a werewolf. My sleepover see, I keep saying Dracula so much, it's gonna happen multiple times, I'm sure. My sleepover Deadpool Funko Pop, and one of those Nintendo Ghosts I got as like a freebie at Comic-Con one year. She's the only one of Dracula's children that I have merch from, unless I guess you count the fact that I have Ghoul School on DVD, and I do own a makeup palette that was inspired by Lily Munster. I didn't actually watch the Munsters much growing up. I ended up being more of an Addams girly. However, I've always liked Lily's look. See my thoughts on Robbie Reyes, my comments on Jason Todd, and one of my favorite X-Men Rogue. And I really do wish we had new monster families in pop culture. Lily's actually an interesting case because technically she's not an only child. She's just, the star of the show, so we see the most of her. But she does have a brother who's based off of the Wolfman, and a sister who I don't believe we ever see, but is the mother of her human-looking niece, Marilyn. This would make Marilyn one of the few grandchildren of Dracula, alongside Lily's own son, Eddie, who clearly takes after his uncle and is a werewolf too. because Dracula can turn into a wolf, a skill that I mentioned is probably rarely utilized by writers because they want to make a distinction between vampires and werewolves. I think it makes sense that he would have a son that's more strictly werewolf-like, and conversely, a grandson. Unlike Alucard, both Dracula and Lily have good relationships with their Dracula dads, but Lily is definitely more the fiery one of the three. This makes sense because she's also somewhat a parody of the standard housewife and mother character in a traditional sitcom, on top of being a vampire. Her vampiric abilities were probably also sometimes downplayed given the TV show budget from the 60s thing. I mean, they also had to take into account the makeup and all the stuff that went into making Fred Gwynn look like Frankenstein. I think with all the aesthetic of the show, it definitely affected how much magic and things they were willing to portray. But moving on to Mavis, who is also from a piece of media geared towards children. Although she does end up being a wife and mother as Hotel Transylvania goes on, I feel like this makes her fall somewhere in the middle of the Dracula and Lily spectrum. I honestly don't have many strong feelings about Mavis. She and her version of Dracula had the standard overprotective father, rebellious daughter storyline, which isn't really one of my favorites, like the 90s Father of the Bride movie being one of the rare exceptions. I was fine with her original character design, but from a creative standpoint, I do find it kind of disappointing that it doesn't really change at all throughout the franchise. I'm not saying she should have dressed more like Morticia or Lily as she got older, but I don't think many women who look exactly the same / have the same style they had as a teenager after they get married and have kids, especially since Hotel Transylvania has some great concept art. Her bat form is very cute though. Her son Dennis is at first like Marilyn and seemingly completely human, but that's in part because Dennis' father is also human. I can't remember if Marilyn's father was a vampire or another type of monster. I don't know if we ever see him either. But ultimately, Dennis turns out to have vampiric abilities, so it doesn't end up being much of a problem. Off the top of my head, I don't think there are any other grandchildren of Dracula, but I'd be happy to be wrong about that. In any case, I kind of put myself in a bad position because of how I organize this. I don't have any smooth way of bringing up Sabella, so we're just diving in. Sabella is from the Scooby-Doo franchise, specifically the movie Ghoul School, which just features Shaggy, Scooby, and Scrappy from the original gang. Sabella also shows up many years later in one episode of the Cartoon Network series OKKO. Not sure how they pulled it off, but I love seeing her again, and I believe she was one of the few of the girls that was voiced by the same actress. Her design is also relatively simple, but what I like about it is the fact that she has purple hair, and her dress sleeves kind of give off Batwing vibes, as well as the fact that she kind of does use her hair in a wing-like way when she moves. She kind of acts like a big sister character to the other girls, and is possibly the oldest in the context of Ghoul School. She doesn't have a lot of screen time, to be fair, but even though I said I wasn't going to rank anyone, I do have a soft spot for Sabella because I came across her first, probably, and she could be intense if the situation demanded. We only see her interact with her father towards the end of the movie, and we don't really get much, although she does kind of make him a cute little bat sweater. Actually, in hindsight, I'd say that Lily's version of Dracula is probably the most different out of all the other depictions, whereas Sabella's is the most, I guess, classic, based off of the Universal movies version of him. This is partly, too, because Lily's dad version of Dracula exists in a sitcom, so he's kind of more goofy, and he has the scientist thing going on top of being a vampire. Since Mavis's father is voiced by Adam Sandler, some of the goofiness from him is to be expected, but they played quite a few things straight as well. Alucard's father was probably the most intense version, largely because Castlevania is one of the only ones of these stories that was meant for an older adult audience. I think it's rated mature on Netflix. I don't remember if you ever see Lily's mom in canon, but Alucard and Mavis do canonically have mothers, but Disney princess style, they are dead. Lisa, Alucard's mama, probably was the most personality and the most screen time in spite of that fact. Easy to understand why Dracula would go full revenge mode for her. But Mavis's mom seems sweet. I mean, again, Dracula had a beef with humans for a long time over her, so she had to have been kind of cool, I guess. In any other case, there are the monsters that are depicted as having kids too. Both Ghoul School and Monster High pretty much exist on that premise alone. That and puns. But I'd bet $2 whole that Dracula has the most. That, though, does make for a nice lead into what I think I want to talk about next. The Trip website refers to multiple supernatural creatures existing in one piece of media as a monster mash, which is based off of the song. So I definitely think it'd be interesting to talk about how different monster characters interact with each other and what that says about the world I guess they reside in. For now, though, I'm going to end my Dracula's Children thing here. So, as always, leave a like if you liked, maybe subscribe for more nerdy rambling, and as always, have a good one.